James, thank you for being here this evening. What is your question for the candidates?
All of you seem to be against the bailouts for the large banks, yet the vast majority of economists agree that without some form of bailout, our economy would be in a much worse state. What would you have done?
And we're back to Rebecca Sink-Burris for the first response.
Many economists feel that way, and many economists feel that we could have had an orderly dissolution of those banks who had made risky loans and who had behaved irresponsibly, and that bad paper would have been bought up by sound banks, and we could have turned this around without bailing out failing banks who had been, run into the ground basically by people acting irresponsibly without using taxpayer money. And that's very important. As it was, the banks that got bailed out and the banks that didn't get bailed out, a lot of that's done for political reasons. In fact, whenever you put an issue into the political arena, it's going to be decided by who has the most political power. And those big banks, I'll just bet that a lot of them had contributed to campaigns on both sides of the aisle, and thus were able to use their influence to save themselves from their own bad choices in giving loans to people who shouldn't have been given loans, and in not looking after their customers' money the way they should have. So there's differences of opinions on whether the bailout for the banks, the TARP, was a good idea or not. And I think that time will only tell. Usually when the government gets into economics, it ends up making things worse and making recessions last longer rather than getting over with sooner.
Dan Coates?
James, I would just like to add one thing to what Ms. St. Burris said. Not usually, always, when government seems to get involved in administering these policies, whether they're subsidies or spending programs, it gets messed up. Bureaucracy and politics go together to make a bad cocktail. I did not support this TARP bill. I would not support this TARP bill had I been in Congress at the time. My opponent has said that I did and lobbied for someone. It's actually totally wrong. We have proved it. We have demonstrated it's available for anybody to see. But listen, bailing out, and he did vote for the bailout of Wall Street. The community banks didn't get bailed out. The big guys did. The small businesses didn't get bailed out. The big guys did. That's political power exercised at the expense, I think, of a lot of small and medium businesses. Our community banks, which have been faithful in terms of putting out good mortgages and to people who could repay those mortgages, got caught up in the same kind of regulation, same kind of issues that the big guys who made all the mistakes made. Yes, apply that to, you go after them, but don't drag everybody else in for the people that have made the abuses. So I don't think that putting all this money into government and saying, you decide, you run the auto companies. Government can't run auto companies. There are procedures in place for companies that every other company has to go through if they fail, and that's a bankruptcy.
All right, Brad Ellsworth.
Well, thank you, James. A minute and a half is a short time to talk about this. When our President George Bush, came to the Congress and said, we need this money, with that look in their eye that our economy is about to go over a cliff, that requires action. No one wanted to be in that situation. But what the Congress did is then put rules on that made sure that the money would be paid back with interest, and it is. But, Mr. Coach, you can't come back to Indiana and say one thing, or say when I was there, because you weren't there. You were before, and you did lobby. If anyone cares to, go to factcheckdancoats.com. What you lobbied for, you're in your firm, for Citibank, the New York Stock Exchange, Visa, Goldman Sachs, the companies that were responsible for this. It's out of your own lobbying reports, Senator Coates. You can't say that. You can we supply the paper to everyone who's interested. And so again, I would say that it was drastic times, and our country is hurting. And when it comes time to rush in and save somebody, instead of letting our economy and our pension plans and our 401ks and my mother's small savings go over the end of a cliff, then I'm willing to step in and save that. And we'll get that money back, and it'll be paid back. And we put regulations in place that'll stop it from ever happening again.
And we will now go with another one of our voter questioners. We have Deanne Ross, who is a small business owner from Indianapolis. We also thank you for making the trip this evening. What is your question for the candidates?
The health care bill contained a small provision in it for all businesses to report and submit 1099s to all of our vendors where we purchase over $600 within the fiscal year. This provision has scared many small business owners like myself because I have to wear many hats, and one of them is accounting. Trying to keep track of the fuel purchases for our company truck going on credit cards all over the state. It's just going to be a paperwork nightmare. I want to know your position on this requirement that was buried into the 2,000-page health care bill, and do you believe this section should be deleted? I know 2 attempts have been made so far, but nothing has made it through committee.
And this question goes first to Dan Coates.
Well, it is a nightmare, and it shouldn't have been in there. My opponent said he read every page of that bill. That could have been taken out. Every business person I've talked to in Indiana has said this is just a nightmare. Everything I purchase, think about a hospital or a university or any other major company, the thousands of things they purchase. There's not enough warehouse space in Washington to house all the forms, or enough IRS residents to oversee those, practitioners to oversee those, the mess that this has created. And yes, Congress has failed to overturn that. Just one of the many, many, many things that are wrong with this health care bill. I just want to mention to the congressman here that he is accusing me of doing things that my law firm represented, 850 lawyers, 12 offices all across the country. I did not represent any of those companies that he mentioned for anything, let alone for the TARP. And that has been listed, and that is all available for your proof. Now, that would be like me saying, Congressman, there are 435 members of Congress, 535 in the Senate, counting the Senate. You get paid by that entity, so therefore you're responsible for everything that any one of those 435 members does. You know, some of them are under ethics considerations, some of them are in jail, actually. I'm not holding you responsible for that, and I don't think you should hold me responsible for a lawyer maybe in San Francisco or Houston that works in our firm had a client I had nothing to do with.
Expired. We will move now to Brad Ellsworth.
Well, thank you very much, and I will answer your question, but I will respond. Senator Coates, your lobbying firm may have 850 attorneys, but it was only 25 to 30 lobbyists. And this is right out of your own 900-page lobbying report. And you were the co-chair. That co-chair doesn't mean, like you said before, the janitor or secretary. You made $600,000 from that lobbying firm and if they start making the co-chair, that usually indicates that you've got a position of high. And so you can't come back to Indiana and tell people that you had no responsibility or you were on the level of a secretary or janitor. We should all be looking for janitor jobs then, if they pay $600,000 a year. You're right, the bill was in there. The part you were talking about was in there. It is in there. There's legislation proposed to take that out. We'll look at that. The reason it was put in because people were trying to get around that by small increments and not reporting different parts of folks that work for them on a long basis over a year's time and not paying their adequate amount of tax. And that's why it's put in there. But I think I've co-sponsored the legislation you're talking about to remove that portion so that it doesn't unfairly hamper small business like your own.
Rebecca Sink Burris.
If we institute the fair tax, this kind of record keeping will no longer be the monster that it is for small businesses and large businesses alike. But of course, this kind of thing does hit small business the hardest. And my opponents are from the parties of big business. Almost everything they do legislatively helps big business. They get tax breaks, they get subsidies, they get perks. It does not help small business. Almost every time it makes business harder for the small business person. And that is the most important segment of our economy. That's the segment that produces the most new jobs. That's the segment that usually is able to bring us out of recession. It's not happening right now because of rules like this that were included in the health care bill that no one, of course, knew about because we couldn't know what was in that bill until we passed it. Is that responsible governing? I don't think so. I think Congress needs to be